Hello, and welcome to the Smart Granular Controls track orientation. This is for FHIR Connectathon 25. It's a virtual Connectathon here in September of 2020. My name is Gino Canessa, and I am hosting the track, so I will be your host for this session as well. Before we jump into it, I would like to point out the URL here, aka.ms/connectathon-gino. And this deck is available there, so if you're looking for the links, it's probably easiest to just grab the deck and look at it there. Jumping in, we're going to go through what a Connectathon is and why you should attend. Go through some of the virtual considerations. A couple now have been virtual due to the COVID situation, so we are all getting a hang of it, and there are a few changes from the last one. We'll also go through the track introduction and kind of cover what we're hoping to achieve, discuss a little bit about the report out, and take a look at the reference implementation that'll be available for testing against. So what is a Connectathon? Really, a Connectathon is just an opportunity to get everyone together and test things. The things that are being tested will change from track to track. In some cases, it's testing implementations against each other for things that are a little more advanced. And in other cases, it's testing out the specification itself. And it's really an opportunity just for everyone to get together and kind of in an informal environment with very low risk of failure. So what that means is this is not a competitive situation where people are trying to show off their products and what they can do. It's more of a situation of saying, okay, we want to make these things interoperable and make sure that we can work together on these. I also mentioned the specifications. Connectathons are required for resources and implementation guides in order to advance in the FHIR maturity model. And there's a link there to a discussion on what that is. But essentially, it's just a ranking system for how mature various content is. When something's first introduced, it comes in at maturity level 0. And that's a way of indicating to people that this is brand new and open for a lot of feedback. And then as it progresses up to, I believe it's maturity level 5, once it becomes normative. And at that point, it's obviously ripe for regulations and very difficult to change moving forward. So as you move through those, Connectathons are one of the gates that you need in order to move on to the next step in some situations. So not only are they beneficial for everyone involved for testing, but they're actually required in order to move things forward. Quick slide on registration. Costs are there. Registration link is available on the hl7.org site under the events section. And it's the only Connectathon you can register for right now. Even though it is virtual, every participant must register and pay. HL7 needs to run the event, and there's various fees and vendors that need to be involved with that process. So they've made a point to ask us to make sure that we're not sharing links or anything along those lines. Here's a quick participant checklist. So if you're looking at participating, especially if this is your first Connectathon, there are some things here that you'll want to make sure you do prior to the event starting. First is obviously registering. So there's a link directly to the event page, and that should ease that process. You'll also want to register or just check to make sure it's still working is your access to Confluence. And Confluence, if you're not familiar, it's kind of a documentation wiki site. HL7 uses it for all the documentation here in FHIR. So not only are things like the Connectathon and all this information there, but the work group meeting minutes, if you're looking at how to write an implementation guide or modify a resource, all of those things are in Confluence. So a great resource there. From after you have access, you'll want to make sure you select a track from the Connectathon overview page. And so This is, again, a page on Confluence, and it just lists all the tracks that are available for this particular Connectathon. If you're scrolling around in there, you can actually see all the previous Connectathons as well. So if you're trying to kind of see the historical value, a lot of them have the same names carried forward from one session to the next. So you'll be able to see kind of the history, which is kind of fun. Once you've picked out what track you're doing, please go ahead and fill out the pre-Connectathon survey. And this is just a quick 2-minute thing on SurveyMonkey. And that just lets all the organizers know what track you're attending primarily and some just information like that. Very useful for understanding what's kind of popular or not, what there's a lot of public interest around. In the in-person surveys or Connectathons, it's also useful for arranging the tables so they know how big of a table to do. Hopefully we'll be getting back to in-person Connectathons at some point, so we want to make sure we're continuing to do that, even if it's slightly less needed here on the virtual side. After that, and this is just a bullet point here to prepare your technical environment, what that's going to mean is going to depend a lot on what track you're doing and how you're participating. But if you are doing things like reviewing specifications and things like that, you want to make sure you have access to whatever tools you need to submit changes. If you are testing actual code, you'll want to make sure that you have debugging set up, your firewall set up. You'll want to make sure if you're using some sort of cloud hosting that you have easy access to that and can make changes quickly. Because again, once people start testing, things are going to pop up relatively quickly. You'll want to make sure you registered on chat.fhir.org, and this is often referred to as Zulip. That's the kind of communications platform that we use for FHIR. Everyone that's working on everything will be on there pretty much all the time that we're awake. So there's streams for just about any topic. That's how things are organized. So for instance, in the case of granular controls, we're using the Smart stream. There are streams covering subscriptions, US core, writing implementation guides, anything under the sun. If you're not familiar with it and want to get started, Implementers is usually a good place if you have a question that you don't know where to answer. And we go through a little bit more of this later. From there, you can connect with your track lead and the other participants in the track. Make sure you note the check-in times. So different tracks will have different times that they say, you know, yes, we're open the whole day, but we want to make sure we have specific meetings at different times. And then we'll be using the Zoom platform, but through Whova. And Whova is just an event management application. So in this case, it'll be tracking everything for us so we don't have to hand out and try to manage lots of different Zoom links. They'll just be listings for all the different tracks, and people can pop in and out of them quite easily. So the Whova information itself will actually be sent to everyone who's registered. It's not a public link, so please do not share it. Again, this is from the big bosses at HL7, and we want to make sure that everything's on the up and up. When you do register, and this is just, they ask us to put this in the orientations as well, but this is part of your agreement when you register for the Connectathon. So it's just a note saying you'll behave ethically and respectfully, that you're not going to be recording things, sharing things, doing things you're not supposed to. Again, I've been to several of these and never had a problem with it, but they ask us to highlight that that is there. So beyond the Connectathon itself, there are a few special sessions, especially if you're new. I would highly recommend this first one on Thursday, September 10th at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. And I guess I should mention all the times by default are going to be in US Eastern time. That's kind of the official compromise time zone that they use for listing everything, just to make sure there's a little less confusion. So it was kind of the middle of where the participants are. So 9:30 a.m. Eastern, there's going to be the Intro to Fire session. If you're new or just getting your feet wet, I highly recommend attending that one. Same thing, there's a later in that day at 11 a.m. Eastern, there's a fire testing and tools. And this, I believe, focuses a lot on the Inferno test platform, which there's a lot of automated testing that happens in some of the areas in particular. So if you're interested in that, again, that's a great session to attend as well. Beyond that, there will be these track highlight sessions throughout the Connectathon, and they're just 15-minute sessions to kind of give an overview of what's going on. So if there's a session that you're interested in, but not really at the point where you can commit to participating fully, that's a great way to kind of catch up on what's going on. So there'll be a schedule posted in Whova, and there will be introductions to the topic, technical demonstrations, and things like that. And again, they ask us to highlight, this is not a product showcase. So this is not a time to be showing off your product and pitching to find customers, but instead it's just a way of showing what's going on, what's being tested, and what progress is being made in FHIR. There's also a Connectathon general info session. That's on Tuesday, September 1st, which by the time you're watching this will probably have passed already. It does have some good information on Whova and how all that is going to work. There's a registration link here, and there should be a video recording available of it afterwards. So if you're unsure of some of the tooling, this is a great resource to look up and find. So the Connectathon itself is actually going to be Thursday and Friday, September 10th and 11th. And again, those are 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern. However, the kickoff is on Wednesday from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern. The reason why this is the case is there's a lot of time zones, obviously, for people that are attending, and this particular hour is kind of the optimal compromise hour that they found. So even though the Connectathon needs to be the 2 days, Thursday and Friday, they wanted to have the kickoff session at a time that it's more convenient for everyone to attend. So it's great information. If you can attend, please do. And then the testing will actually be, again, Thursday and Friday. And generally speaking, it's during the 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern time. So if you are well outside of those time zones, please connect with your track lead and the other participants. And most people are pretty forgiving on being able to arrange things around different needs if that is your case. There's also going to be the wrap-up session, and that's on Friday the 11th at 6 p.m. Eastern. So right at the time the Connectathon's finishing, we'll go into the wrap-up session. And again, these are generally pretty good just to understand what's been going on. So, moving from Connectathon General into Granular Controls. We'll just cover all these things pretty quickly here. Cover a little bit more about who I am, what the track is for, how we expect it to work, and all of that nature. So again, I'm Gino Canessa. I'm with Microsoft. I'm on the Standards and Interop team in beautiful Madison, Wisconsin. I've been in this role for about a year and a half now, loving every minute of it. I've been in healthcare for the past too many years, and so I'm familiar with the landscape and have been digging into FHIR here for a bit now. Best way to get hold of me is on Zulip. Again, that's chat.phir.org. You can look me up, or there's a link directly to PM with me. I'm also on many streams pretty regularly, and you can at me in just about anything, and I will come across it. So the track itself, here's a link to the page on Confluence for Argonaut Granular Controls. And this track, again, as I was mentioning earlier, there's the granular controls, but really this is part of SMART. And SMART is if you're not familiar, the authorization and authentication framework, it's built on top of OAuth 2. And it's just the specification that's used to kind of standardize the focus in some of the broad abilities of OAuth into something that's going to interop between different people. So right now, the published version is kind of Smart v1, and while we started off looking at just how to make more granular scopes, we're kind of turning it into what do we need for Smart v2 project. So the scopes are kind of the core of what we're going to be testing, but there are some other topics that we're going to want to at least discuss. So again, the first thing is the scope changes. And so this is this section here. And it's really a way of saying the initial categories are too broad. If you want to grant access to patient observation for reading, that includes everything from vital signs to test results on potentially very confidential tests that you've had run. So we wanted to kind of focus in. So the first thing was figuring out how to do operation access changes. So before there were only 3 options. You could do .read, .write, and .star, and this is in Smart v1. So if we look here, we can see this is, see how the yellow shows up, but it's .read, .write, and .star. And what we want to do is actually change that to this model, which is more along the lines of the RESTful interactions. So create, read, update, delete, and search. So you can see now if you have something like a monitor for a patient that needs to be able to write vital signs, you can just grant access to create observations. Now they won't be able to go through and update existing ones or things like that that could be problematic. So it's just a way of focusing it. The next section is, these are kind of together, the access by category and access by tag. They look very similar, but it's just a way of then filtering down even more. So in this case, we want to say observation category. So you could say, for instance, I just want access to vital signs, and that's for reading, writing, searching, updating, deleting, as you specified before. Same thing for tags, saying we want to access only a specific tag security level, and that, again, gives more control over what's available. Obviously, for this testing and for the implementation guide that will be the result of all of this, we're going to have some of these specific cases, but a lot of the goal is understanding the syntax, and then other implementation guides can add additional things as needed. Other than the scope changes, there's a couple of things that we want to discuss and aren't quite fleshed out enough for full testing. One is access to operations. And so this is the same thing if you want to grant access to patient everything or maybe docref, some of these common operations, we'd like to make sure that the syntax can support doing that. So if you have web services that are paired along with your FHIR server and you want to use the same authorization authentication framework, are there ways we could communicate that? The other 2 kind of areas that we want to highlight and potentially discuss are a token introspection API, and this is part of the ONC rulings, I believe, so this is definitely coming soon, and we'll want to make sure that there's a good foundation for everyone to build off of and a standard way of doing it. And additionally, there's some additions to client authentication that we'd like to discuss. In particular, right now, all of the operations are based off of symmetric keys, which is great, but does require a shared secret. And so we've been looking at if there's a way to add asymmetric keys in a nice standard way so that that's available for use in Smart as well. As far as roles, there's really 2 roles, a server and a client, and the requirements are very similar because they're going to be communicating with each other. So first here we have the server. We are focusing on FHIR R4 in this IG. So we're everything should be FHIR-4 compatible. You need to be able to do a smart app launch. You need to be able to do a standalone launch within that. And you need support for observations, because that is the resource we just decided to go with here. Minimally, you need to be able to read and do some sort of searching. Again, we're not going to say full search with include and rev include and everything else is mandatory, but those do open up some interesting questions on their own when you talk about them. So if you have them, we'll definitely be testing them, but minimally, you need to have just some basic filters. The client looks very similar. It's a FHIR-4 client that can do smart app launch and go through the standalone process and supporting observations for reading and searching. So again, that's just the two sides that you need in order for everything to communicate. So after the brief overview, if that's the track you're interested in, please go ahead and sign up at the link here. It's just a spreadsheet with some information. In particular, it'd be great if you could let us know what you're planning to bring, server or client-wise. And a lot of that is just to help people connect during the Connectathon and make sure that if you are bringing a server, people who are bringing clients can find you and test against you, and vice versa. There's an area for notes, so if there's anything else you want to note about plans you have, if you're planning to only have the operation access, or you're looking at tag but not category, things like that, just having those in a public listing helps everyone and makes sure that if you have a server that doesn't implement category, the clients aren't coming to you repeatedly saying, hey, category search isn't working, and things like that. Briefly here, I want to just touch on each of the scenarios that are listed, and these are all on the Confluence site as well, but just kind of to cover what they are. And this terminology, if you're not familiar, is very common in these tracks. It's just a great way of focusing in on a use case and then being able to report out progress on each of those cases. So in this case, scenario 0 is kind of the bar that you need to meet in order to come to the party. And that's saying you need to be able to support the interaction style scopes. So patient/observation.rs, read search. This model of granting scopes, that's kind of the first step in implementing all of these pieces. So if you're on a server side, you need to accept it. You need to put it through if you have your authorization screen and things like that. You need to be able to filter results, reject queries, however you want to handle that. On the client side, again, you need to be able to request them and then perform operations with or without those scopes for testing. Once that's done, moving on to scenario 1, and these kind of build on each other as much as possible. So now you can see we have the same request, but now we're adding the category of vital signs. So now what we're saying is, in this case, we want access to read and search observations that have a category of vital signs. So again, servers need to accept this, filter this, show this to users, whatever they need to do. And then clients need to be able to request these and show that they're working or not. Scenario 2, very similar to scenario 1, because now we're swapping out category for tag. So now we're saying, instead of looking for the category of vital signs, we're looking for things that are flagged with low security. Once these are all done, there's actually a lot of interesting combinations that can be built. These are the examples that I'm showing in here, but you start getting into what if I have category of vital signs and security of N or L or whichever one. And so there'll be a lot of playing along those lines, but these are kind of the basic up and running versions. So if you have questions, this is how you get them answered. So again, Zulip, which is chat.phir.org. Here are some links. So the smart stream, this is where the Granular's control track is living and all the information. There's actually a Connectathon thread that I've linked to here and if not, just the stream in general. It has a lot of other information. This is where we've been posting as we've been discussing all of these changes. So if you're interested in historical, that's a great place to look. I put a link here to the Connectathon management stream in Zulip. And again, this is a great place if you're having problems with your registration, getting into the meetings, any of the tooling, anything like that. This is where you'll want to go to ask those kinds of questions. And if all else fails, you can PM with me on Zulip. And again, if I can't answer your question, I should at least be able to direct you to the right place. If all else fails and you're having problems and really don't know what to do, Sandy Vance is the Connectathon administrator, and she has kindly shared her email address and phone number. Please do not abuse that, but that is available as well. So, some things you'll want to look at if you're new to this area and aren't sure where to get started. First is there's some base technologies, RESTful APIs and conventions, so understanding GET, POST, HTTP headers, all those types of things. That's going to serve you very well in this arena. This next link here is to the FHIR RESTful interactions. And so what happens is they don't exactly map one-to-one. If you issue a GET in REST, you're just essentially asking for receiving data. In FHIR, that can be a distinction between a read, a search, a conditional read, some of those different things that are all what would fall under a RESTful GET. They have names for specific FHIR interactions. Same thing with POST, that POST and PUT, and then there's create versus update and conditional versions of all of those as well. So it's a good read if you're not familiar. The Smart Authorization Framework. And again, there's some links here that there's the Smart App Launch Framework, and this is the specification that builds on OAuth 2. And this is the FHIR version. And then there's the smarthealthit.org site, and there's a Smart App Launcher Framework. It's a kind of a sandbox that you can use to play with clients and servers. Both are available there, and then you can bring your own and interact with them. So lots of great information there. If you're not familiar with JWTs or JOTs, they're JSON Web Tokens, and that's what a lot of this information is going to be passed back and forth with. So you might want some background information on there. Again, there's a link here. It's jwt.io. Has some decent information. If you're looking for how to actually use FHIR as a developer, there are libraries available. You'll want to start here. This is the, again, on Confluence, a page listing the open source implementations. Most common languages have one. So if you're looking for Java, C#, Python, whatever, there's an implementation there likely. So it's a great way to get started and kind of eases the burden of figuring all this out. Same thing, there's a listing of public test servers. So if you are building something and then want to go ahead and try it out, there are places that host things for that. Moving on here is the track report out. So this is at the end of the track, and periodically throughout I'll be taking notes, but I'm just going to be asking about how everything went. And to keep in mind, success and failure are about what's learned, not what's actually accomplished in a way. So it's less interesting to say, yep, everyone hooked up and everything worked, and that's it, versus saying, okay, well, we were testing these areas, we found these issues, and then people managed to get around them this way, and we figured out some feedback we need to go and update things. And these are just documented for future reference. And again, you can go and look through the old ones, so if you're interested in that. So really quickly here, just to finish out, there's the test implementation. And this is building on top of the Smart App Launcher that's I linked to before. And so you can see, if you're familiar with it, I've added an additional link here. And this is local right now. This isn't on the public one yet. but there's an additional here link for a granular control test app. And this has the Smart V1 scopes here so that you can test some basic access if you need to. And then you can go through and click on the scenarios. And this has all the things that we've talked about in the scenarios. I'm still working on the playground, so I won't show that yet. But here we can say we want to look for observation RS. That's less interesting. Let's look for observations with a category of vital signs. When we launch the auth redirect, we are doing a standalone, so we're logging in as a patient. We can see that the application is requesting observations with a category of vital signs, and it also wants to search for observations with a category of vital signs. I'm going to approve it, and then we can see the server here accepted all of our requests for scopes. We have the patient resource if we want to see it that we logged in as, just for reference. We're not interested in that right now. And then here we can see in observations, we started off and we got 37 results when we looked for the category of vital signs for this patient. And we can come here and check these boxes and then research so that we can see, if we add security label N and do a search, we have 0 returned. So this will let everyone play with and test kind of what's going on, and the server will work with other clients as well. So with that, if you have any questions, please reach out. PM me on Zulip, again, is probably the best way to do, or asking in the Smart Stream in the Connectathon thread or otherwise. And otherwise, thank you very much, and hope to see you soon. Cheers.